Today I've got Doris Kearns Goodwin. We're talking about the 8-part series on A&E, which takes a fresh look at the epic history of the American West. It's called Kevin Costner's The West. And as every time I have Doris on the show, it's like being in my favorite class in college, and I'm very attentive and paying attention. Doris, how are you?
I'm very glad to be with you again. I'm doing just fine.
Thank you. Let's talk about, I got to see the first couple of episodes, and it really caught me off guard a little bit. So talk a little bit about the first episode, just to tease on John Brown and Kansas.
One of the things that I think we forget about the history of the West is that it really has a lot to do with the slavery battle that was going on. Because as the new states were coming into the Union, like Kansas and Nebraska, that decision had to be made. Would they be free states or would they be slave states? And so that was a big part of the whole struggle leading up to the Civil War. And John Brown comes into Kansas, the abolitionist comes into Kansas to try and make sure that the voting is right for it becoming a free state. And all sorts of violence takes place. And you're beginning to see portents of what's going to happen some years later when the Civil War begins.
Almost sounds like a repeat of history about 4 or 5 years ago. It almost sounds like that. Definitely.
Yes.
I got a
drama in this story. It's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. What got you involved with this, and how did Kevin Costner get involved?
Well, when the History Channel came to me and Beth Lasky, my partner in doing production with history, we'd done a series of presidential documentaries and asked us if we wanted to be involved in the history of the West. We immediately said yes. And to be involved with Kevin Costner was a wonderful thing because he knows so much about the West. It's been in his heart and soul from the time he was a young boy. And then all the movies he's made, the great movies. But now there was a chance with a documentary to have a whole series of things where you could have experts talking about the scholars who know all the new scholarship about Native Americans. And you've got cinematography, and you've got reenactments, and you've got maps, and and you've got music, and it gets you at all different angles. And he taught me so much about the West. It's been something that he's grown in knowledge with each movie he's made. And it was so much fun to do this with him. He never stopped talking once he started, and I loved it.
That's great. That second episode talking about the gold rush was very interesting. Let me go back to the first episode, because I didn't realize the territories, the California territories, what happened with that. Kansas, how small it was, and I guess it's the Nebraska territory they were talking about was huge.
Yeah, the land mass is enormous. What's so interesting to me is to watch the development of the West. Think about the people who came to America in the first place. They came from the West to the East and settled on the East Coast. And then after the Revolution, we get all the land up to the Mississippi, new land. People start moving there. And then the Louisiana Purchase comes with Jefferson, and we get land to the Rocky Mountains. And then they keep moving there. Each time that there's a constriction and not opportunity, they keep moving west. And then you get Texas eventually. And then you finally get to California. You get the land from the Mexican-American War. And that's where you get all those southern states. It's just wonderful to watch the country expanding. But then you've got this sad story that the expansion is taking place at the conquest of the Native American tribes who'd been there for so many thousands of years.
Yeah, that's what one Native American was saying, more than 10,000 years being there. And then all of a sudden this is happening. Now let's talk about the gold rush, and how for every one person who was going for a gold rush, two people were looking to rob them.
Well, there wasn't much law in those states at that time. That's the problem, right? So the interesting thing I think about this documentary is that in some ways we see what we've always thought of the West, the sheriff and the outlaws and very little law and robbers and thieves. But then we're also seeing that communities were beginning to be formed because women went with the men finally. And so you got communities settling, you got buildings being put up, you've got little towns that are developing, a law eventually develops, and you get cities eventually. So you're getting both sides of the story.
Speaking of both sides of the story, and watching the two episodes I had, it was very interesting and made me think a little bit about my history, because I kept 1850s, and I was born in 54. So I'm looking at, I'm just 3, maybe 4 generations away from all of this happening.
Now, isn't that interesting? And in fact, 1854 is a huge year in the milestone of our history, because that's when Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed, and it allows people in Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves, you know, whether they're going to be free or slave state, as I was saying before. And that's happening all over the West. And the balance of power is what makes the South worry that they're losing if they lose some of these states becoming free states, leading to the tension in the 1850s that leads to the Civil War. So the settlement of the West had a huge part to do with why the Civil War happened, because the Southern states felt if we lose dominance of population, which they have already in the North, and we don't have these states to be slave states, then we're going to lose power in the Congress.
Very interesting. Now, I gave you a little bit of what I was looking at, is talking about generations, and think about my grandfather, not knowing who my great-grandfather was, or my great-great-grandfather. What do you want the audience to take away from it? Because I was pretty excited about it.
No, I love what the audience to take away is that it's such a human story of people searching for a better life, coming in conflict, as I said, with other people who've been living there for a long period of time, wishing maybe when you look at it, could it have been different? Could they have gotten along better? Was there enough land for them to exist together? There still seems to be a lot of land out there. You always look at history that way. What if? What if? And yet you see that movement across the West, relentless numbers of people, and you see them trying to make a better lives for themselves. And you just find yourself caring about all the people that are there. You don't want to judge it all. You care about the Native Americans. You care about the missionaries. You care about the soldiers who are moving from one place to another. You care about the people that are just going to settle out there. And sadly, they come in conflict.
Definitely come in conflict. It's interesting. I wonder what our history is going to be like 100 years from now. It's going to be very interesting. I've been speaking with Doris Kearns Goodwin. Go ahead, Doris. Yeah. Go ahead, Doris. Tell me what your comment is.
No, I think about that all the time. I wish I could look back 100 years later and see that we got through this time of ours that's difficult. And yet I know from our history that we've gotten through a lot of difficult times before, and that gives us strength in getting through this time as well.
I like that, Doris. I really do. This week with Doris Kearns Goodwin, we're talking about the 8-part series, Kevin Costner's The West. It's on the History Channel. As always, Doris, like I said, I feel like I'm back in college, my favorite lecturer, and I can't wait to get to class. Thank you again.
You're the best. You'd be a good student.
Thanks.